Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about in detail what scientists have found in some of these 19th century grounds. And a lot of artists from the 19th century, such as Van Gogh, the Impressionists, used these grounds. And a lot of you that are writing on the channel and are constantly asking some of these questions and are probably wondering what type of grounds should I use for my own painting. So this is valuable information that you could use to inform your own work. The first thing that I want to talk about is the scientific information that has been published. I find a lot of this information at ResearchGate, which is a wonderful website where you could do a lot of this research on your own. There's a article that has been published by a scientist. This is a scientist that is actively working with a lot of this information. And he recently published this article that has a finding from Gustave Moreau. Gustave Moreau was a 19th century artist, and there's a museum in Paris that has these works. And basically, they have an inventory. They had an inventory that has a sample book from Benand. Claude Benand was a famous color man, and I guess he was a retailer of paints during the 19th century. And he had probably close to 47 samples of linen in this beautiful little leather-bound book that was found in Gustave Moreau's studio. And this is very fascinating for me because obviously as an artist that's interested in materials, this is information that you could use to your benefit. And the scientist takes this little book and essentially samples all these individual swatches of linens and tests the different formulas, what they find in the various formulas or samples that they offered or their commercial offerings during the time. This is, I have some information here and I'm going to be referring to some of my notes. And these are some of the French terms, and I do apologize to my French speakers for my horrible French. They describe some of the linens as toile demi-fine, which is essentially a semi-fine linen. And these linens have various grounds. There's linens that have grounds that are lead and calcite, lead and barite. It's essentially interesting to study all these samples. I've had a lot of you asking me, well, what kind of ground should I use for my paintings? Is there a specific formula that I should be looking at? And well, even here, there's conclusive evidence that there was not just one formula that was used by these masters. They were using various formulas. They used lead white with calcite. They used lead white with barite. In the inventory, there is advertising for linens that are used for pastel. And it's interesting, very interesting, because you see that, I mean, even today we have, our commercial canvases, and there's a lot of various different grounds that we have available to us. So narrowing down this information is really neat and important for us to kind of understand our own materials and how we're going to use them, right? So the first thing that I want to talk about is essentially the formulas. They find primarily by the 19th century artists such as Jacques-Louis David, the turning of the 18th to the 19th centuries. David was working with a new style, the neoclassical style, and he switches from the color grounds of the 18th century and 17th century painters, which I've covered in a lot of the videos. I've covered the grounds of Velázquez. I've covered the grounds of Rubens and Caravaggio, the dark grounds of Caravaggio. And now we move on to a new style. And artists are more interested in luminosity and color. And they've switched now from the color grounds of the 17th and 18th centuries to white color grounds. Although Velázquez was already using white color grounds in the 17th century as well as other artists, this kind of becomes the norm in the ground formulations of some of these artists. So you start seeing grounds that are primarily lead white color, perhaps with some gray shades, and they also find yellow. and earth pigments, but primarily it's white, gray, and yellow that they find in these some of these chemical analysis. And this is important because I've had a lot of you write in the comments below, why would you use a dark ground? Or I never use a dark ground. And indeed, dark grounds are problematic. They tend to yellow, they tend to darken your paintings over time. Caravaggio obviously used dark grounds, but by the 19th century, a lot of artists have opted not to use these dark grounds, and they are now using the lighter, more luminous grounds that are primarily lead white. I was surprised by some of the findings because for a lot of my experiments, I have used lead white grounds that are primarily colored with some pigments, but they usually have an addition of calcite. And calcite's an important material because it gives a lot more flexibility, and you're also getting a lot of the absorbency. That's important. But in the case of these some of these chemical analysis, they find only sometimes very little amounts of calcite, sometimes none at all, and usually it's about 18% maximum that they find in some of these canvas grounds from the 19th century. The addition of barium sulfate is also interesting, and that's a material that is used today by a lot of color manufacturers. The barium sulfate apparently keeps the grounds whiter, and it prevents yellowing, and it gets more stability to the grounds. So it's interesting to kind of come across this information and to kind of document this information. I mean, to have it available to us. These are formulas from manufacturers from the 19th century. Some of the names of some the canvases. One of them is Toile demi fine. Another one is Toile fine moyenne, which are essentially, I guess it translates to semi-fine linens. I believe the 12 fine moyenne, it's a canvas that is semi-fine. And this is interesting because this scientist in particular, he does the analysis on the thread counts and all that, and that will give us a lot of information. So I'm going to be sharing some of that information. By the way, for a lot of you that are looking for this information, I encourage you to go to my website, my school's website, Atelier School Online, where you could become a member. And I'm right now in the process of developing a newsletter and also a page where I'm going to be sharing this information with members. So make sure to check that out in the description below. So a lot of information on the, just not just grounds, but also pigments and all that. So we're going to be sharing that information with you guys. Getting back to Jacques-Louis David, which in the future I intend to make a full video of Jacques-Louis David's techniques, which are relevant to 19th century, the development of 19th century art. I have an image here that I want to share with you guys, an unfinished portrait of Napoleon by Jacques-Louis David. Here you could see the use of a white ground. I've had a lot of you write and ask me, was he using a gray ground or was he using grisaille? And essentially, here it's the evidence that an artist like David is essentially adapting that new style of the 19th century, the luminosity of the ground, which was, we use it today. Most artists today use a white ground, and the Impressionists use white grounds. So nothing fancy here, just a very beautiful linear drawing and essentially just color right on top of the, on the white ground. So makes sense. There's also a lot of other unfinished paintings. Some of the paintings he does do a ébauche, and I had to look that word up. When we were in school, we would say ébaucher, but I guess it's the right terminology in French is ébauche. And it essentially translates to a sketch, which is a brown sketch that it could be kind of related to the 17th century monochromatic undersketch, or the what is called in Spanish we call it la aguada, or el encajado. So these are essentially terms to describe the sketch, But in this case, it looks like David just skips the sketch and he just goes right to the paint. There's hardly any chiaroscuro preparation, although there is other paintings where he does use different techniques, as any artist would be doing, right? During this time and through their evolution of their life, they're changing their techniques. So I don't want to, close in a specific technique to any one artist because I do realize there's an evolution that artists are going through constantly. So, but you could see here this beautiful white ground, and in chemical analysis, now there's a beautiful website called Heritage Journal, and they publish usually scientific studies on some of these painters. And they recently published an article about the death of Murad, and they find a predominantly pure white ground on that one painting and another portrait by David. I thought that he would be using calcite, but to my surprise, he's just strictly using pure lead white. And the lead white is interesting to mention too, because there's a lead white that has a proportion of hydrocerazite and cerazite. These are two different materials that form in the synthesis or the formation of basic lead carbonate. And it's indicative of the stack process method of manufacture. So it goes to show you that essentially these artists were using a lot of the techniques from the 17th century. They just passed on to artists from the 18th century. So manufacturers were using the same manufacture process of stack lead white. So our lead white today is different. So it's the particle size is a lot more consistent, and it's because the manufacturing is absolutely different from the stack process. So there's many videos and articles that have already dealt with that subject. But I want to show you an image of Gustave Moreau. And this is a beautiful self-portrait. So this museum in Paris, they have a sample book that they find in the inventory of Gustave Moreau's studio. And this is where they find the essentially the advertisement or the small sample book of these linens by Claude Venant. Apparently, Claude Venant was the premier color manufacturer or color retailer or art material retailer during the time. And essentially, he's publishing these sample books for artists to have. And there's these beautiful leather bound sample books where artists could kind of choose the type of linen that they were interested in. And today we have that. I mean, there's a great company in Belgium called Classens, and they offer these type of books that you could order and you could have in your studio, and you essentially could order and choose the type of linen that you're interested in. So this is where the information comes from. It's very interesting. This is one of the most important things when you're trying to choose your own materials. And I have done a lot of recreations on the channel, and I'm going to be doing a recreation of David's techniques. It will show the whole entire process of a 19th century canvas. I have here a canvas that I've prepared, just a small sample. And essentially, this is a canvas that is fine linen. That's another thing that I have found with 19th century artists. They switch to the very fine linens that are very dense. And why are they doing that? Well, they're looking for smoother surfaces. An artist like David, he's an artist that is interested in very smooth surface. When you go to the Louvre or you're in front of a David painting, or even other classical painters, they use these very fine linens, and they essentially cover the weave of the linen. And you could achieve that with a very fine weave portrait linen. If you're acquiring a linen that has a high thread count, you will be able to do this. But if the linen doesn't have a lot of threads per centimeter, then you're going to end up with a linen that is very textured, and that is a typical technique that Venetian artists used to essentially bring out their light effects. So when choosing a linen, in choosing materials for your paintings, it's important to have, a good idea or a preconceived idea of where you're heading with your techniques, because you're going to need to prepare essentially for that vision that you have. So I have prepared a video. One of the things that they find in a lot of these samples is a protein layer, which this is common. I mean, for a lot of you that follow my channel, you will see that this is pretty standard for the preparation of any canvases. You have to prepare the linen with rabbit skin glue. I've had, people write on the channel in the comments, why are you using rabbit skin glue? Rabbit skin glue is so destructive and this and that. Well, it's a traditional material that artists use, and it's an important material. And a lot of you that are using PVA, which is essentially a polymer, you could use that, but rabbit skin glue is completely reversible. And that means that you could essentially cover the canvas, cover the linen with the rabbit skin glue, and if you need to intervene the canvas at some point, a restoration team needs to go and essentially, would remove the canvas from the stretchers, or you need to reline the canvas. Then essentially you will have it. Everything's reversible. With PVA, we don't know. I mean, it's such a new material, and we don't know if it will become brittle with time or if it will yellow, but it's not very reversible. So I also don't like PVA because you can, I mean, if you get distortions in the linen, you will, you're stuck with that. With the rabbit skin glue, you could essentially, just essentially wash the linen and take it back and restretch it, and you're back to step one. You didn't lose the material. So those are the advantages of rabbit skin glue. And indeed, this scientific journal, or this scientific information published by Victor Gonzalez, that's the name of the scientist that published this article, he does find a fine protein sized layer between the canvas fibers and the ground can be observed in the cross sections, as is stated in the technical journal that I'm referring to. So what I want to do is I want to address the rabbit skin glue, because a lot of you, I have actually done various videos about rabbit skin glue, and I still get doubts about the rabbit skin glue. People are like, well, should I put a layer of acrylic gesso over? Do I need the rabbit skin glue before the acrylic gesso? If you're using acrylic gesso, you don't need rabbit skin glue. Let's just define it as that. If you're using an oil priming, which is essentially the way that canvases were primed prior to the 20th century, then you will need to protect the fibers of the linen with a layer of protein, in this case, rabbit skin glue. Sometimes some artists would use gesso, during the 19th century, and indeed this manufacturer, Claude Venant, has gesso canvases in his inventory, and they do find in the chemical analysis some of the samples were essentially rabbit skin glue with a fine gesso layer. They even find emulsions. I've had questions about emulsions. I've had, questions about, should I use an emulsion ground? Yes, there's an emulsion grounds that you could use. I do not use the emulsion grounds because, they seem to be brittle, but they were sold and they are documented as, being used by artists. So during the 19th century, prior to that, not so much. But so what I want to do is I want to share a video with you guys that I prepared, essentially detailing the use of rabbit skin glue. And remember, the rabbit skin glue is used if you are interested in oil priming. If you're going to use an oil priming, meaning a paste of oil paint, in this case, lead white, or any other paint that has lead white and earth pigments, then you want to protect the linen fibers with a protein layer. This will prevent the canvas from rotting in the long term. So I prepared this video for you guys. So let's just take a look at that video. We have applied the first layer of rabbit skin glue. The rabbit skin glue has dried fully. And now we're going to pumice the canvas. So this is a very fine weave linen, and we don't want any texture on this canvas whatsoever. So we're going to use a pumice stone. This is a pumice stone, and you can get this anywhere. Usually you could find this at a beauty supply store. And what we're going to do is we're just going to lightly, very, very lightly go over the surface, okay? We're going to apply rabbit skin glue. This is probably one of the most important aspects of your preparation of your canvas, making sure that it's fully sealed. Okay. If you're using a cheaper linen, you may have to take it out of the stretcher bars, re-stretch it. Now, if the linen distorts and you get these ripples or these imperfections on the fabric, that means that you definitely want to upgrade to a better quality linen, because that's usually indicative of a linen that is of lower quality. So that's important to know and to take into account. I've had some students that have used linens. They have experienced problems. So just make sure that you're aware of that, because it could cause a lot of headaches down the line, especially when you're ready to paint and the linen that you're using is just not of good quality. If you're working on a commission, make sure to use a Belgian linen. And you could pass the cost to your client, that's okay, but you're not going to have problems down the line. So make sure to cover the edges once again. You want the edges fully protected. And once we finish with our layer, then we'll be ready to apply our oil priming. This was the standard procedure since the Renaissance. A lot of artists from the Renaissance used gesso as well, such as Titian. But by the 19th century, artists were just working with oil, pure lead white primings. So you saw it's very useful information for a lot of you that are interested in preparing your own canvases. That's a video that is very valuable, especially for artists that are working in a traditional style that are interested in working with these traditional techniques. You will need to essentially learn to apply the rabbit skin glue, cook it. So for a lot of you that are interested in some of these techniques, I want to mention that I do offer a mentorship program through my website, Atelier School Online. We've been doing various courses on Titian, on Rembrandt. And what I do is I usually will take a small group of students and we will essentially reconstruct a lot of these techniques. So the rabbit skin glue is always a difficult subject because it takes a lot of practice. You have to get the proportions right, and it's an organic material. So it's important to learn how to do it correct. Otherwise, you could have problems later on with, if you're doing a commission or selling paintings through a gallery, you want to make sure you get this right. So I've seen a lot of students, struggle with this subject, and it's because it's an organic material. I'm always asked, what are the proportions of rabbit skin glue and this and that? Well, the proportions change from manufacturer to manufacturer, and there's also rabbit skin glue and hide glue. The hide glues come from cows, and the rabbit skin glue could come from rabbits, and it's not the same. There's also goat glue that was used during the 17th century by Spanish artists and also Italian artists, and all those glues are very different. They tend to have different proportions of glue to water, and it's important to understand the various types of glue. There's also parchment glue that tends to be a lot harder, so there's a lot of learning to be done there. So there's a lot of questions also on the use of various grounds. What type of chalk, or why am I using chalk? Why is the chalk useful? Well, grounds are usually dictated by the artist's techniques, and that's why it's important to explore a variety of grounds. A lot of artists today will go to the store and get Liquitex, gesso, or golden gesso, and those are wonderful materials that work perfect. But they're very standardized materials, and you get a certain effect or a certain um, look to your paintings, But when you go to the museums and you're looking for some of those effects or some of those painting surfaces that you see in the Louvre or the Prado Museum, you'll see that it doesn't have anything to do with some of these modern materials, and it's because some of the modern materials have different idiosyncrasies. They look different, they behave different. This is important. I've had a lot of you say, well, what does it matter? Why should I even use these materials? These old materials, and the knowledge base that you get when you're using these materials is incredible. You really will get a profound um, understanding of why these materials were used. And specifically, in something like the paintings of Jacques-Louis David, where he doesn't want a lot of absorbency, and the lead white is essentially, a material that will give you that. So I have a question here. Let's take a look at some of these questions. So, and again, thank you for coming by. I really appreciate your amazing support. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure to subscribe to receive future notifications from my live presentations in the future. There's a lot of valuable information that I'd like to share, so make sure to check out the descriptions below and subscribe to the channel. So let's see here. I have a question from Uncle 60. Thank you for coming by, Uncle 60. How long does rabbit skin glue need to dry before oil ground is applied? I usually let the rabbit skin glue dry over 24 hours. You don't want any humidity in the canvas. So I just essentially, put it aside. Maybe you could put it, with a fan by a window or something where the air is going to be circulating. And in 24 hours, you're able to essentially cover that canvas with oil primer. So again, a very simple but valuable question. That's important. So I have another question here from Himmels Shibi. Nebra. I don't know if I'm saying this correct, but thank you for coming. And again, I think I've seen your questions here before and your visits before, so welcome back to my channel. It says here, Luis, what about the differences between cold and warm stretch linen? These are all concerns, and that's why the knowledge base is important, because you begin to understand there's so many variables. And this has happened in a lot of my classes where the artists will, or the student artists will get linens from a different manufacturer, and they tell me, well, I use this proportion but the linen distorted, and how could I remedy this? And of course I have to pull my knowledge base of my years of experience working with difficult materials, and it's not the same. So you don't want to apply rabbit skin glue that is hot. I never apply rabbit skin glue that is hot. As a matter of fact, a lot of the Spanish manuscripts describe the application of the rabbit skin glue as a gel. I don't like to do that because I find that the rabbit skin glue is just too hard, and essentially it becomes kind of brittle. So I like to apply the rabbit skin glue at a room temperature. I never apply it hot. So that's an important factor. These are organic materials, and it's important to have knowledge of how they're going to behave. Almost like predicting how they're going to behave. So El Papá de Rambo, thank you for coming by. Let's see, what's your opinion on priming the back of the canvas? Yeah, so if you've done a good job with the rabbit skin glue, the idea is that the rabbit skin glue goes through the fiber of the canvas and it soaks the back of the canvas. There's artists that put wax in the back of the canvas. They put rabbit skin glue in the back of the canvas. I don't tend to do that. I have never seen, well, maybe one manuscript. I'll have to, pull up the reference, but most manuscripts do not recommend to to apply rabbit skin glue to size the back of the canvas. So I don't. What I do make sure is that that first layer is going through the canvas and is soaking the canvas, thoroughly. Otherwise, you're going to get bleeding of the oil to the back, and it's going to rot out the canvas. So these are important considerations, and it takes a lot of knowledge to kind of get these things right. You could get the I will tell you a small story. I remember my days at the academy where a friend of mine applied a layer of rabbit skin glue, and I just saw the back of the canvas just soak in oil. And essentially, that's just bad practice. I mean, you don't want that to happen to your canvas. Otherwise, you're going to have rotting, and the painting will have to be relined. So I have another question here from Gina. Gina, thank you for coming by once again. I recognize you from the other live presentations. Okay, so I have a question. I did oils and it took forever to dry. Does paint thinner help dry? So I do not use thinners. I'll tell you why. The paint thinners are toxic, and a lot of this has not been documented, and I wouldn't dare that there's a study about it, but I do know there's a high um, rate of cancer among artists, and I don't know if it's related to solvents, but I don't use solvents. I've had training in the past for some of the studios that I've worked where artists have used solvents in their studio, and essentially they're drinking coffee in their studio, and that solvent is essentially in the air, and now it's going in your coffee, and now you're putting it in your body. And that's something that I do not want to deal with, especially with, all the other toxic materials. So I don't use thinners, but I will recommend if you're looking for a nice modern dryer that is, I can't dare say it's not toxic, but at least it will not be, as bad. You could use, a drying oil, or put a little addition of liquid into your oil. Now, the liquid probably does have a little bit of solvent, but it's not going to be as as strong as paint thinners. So I would stay away from the paint thinners and anything that has to do with solvents. So I have another question here from Philip. Philip, thank you for coming by. I appreciate your visit. Let's see. Does new quality linen need to be washed of its factory sizing and dried on a stretcher prior to applying fresh true rabbit skin glue? So there is some manuscripts that recommend, Palomino's one of them. He recommends washing the linen and essentially, making sure that the linen has been going, the shock of moisture to the linen essentially. Initially you're going to have distorting of the linen if it's not high quality. There's also linen, I guess today there's manufacturers that intervene the linen with sizing, and that's a normal, I guess, commercial practice for a lot of these manufacturers. So I usually use linens from Belgium, and those seem to be top notch. I mean, they behave really well when you apply 2 coats of rabbit skin glue. They, they're perfect. Sometimes you just only need one if you're using, if you're doing gesso, traditional gesso. But for the most part, I would probably, I mean, if you're not willing to wash the linen, you could probably wet the linen, stretch it, and then wet it. Just apply, just brush water on there, and if you see any changes, then re-stretch it. But that could be difficult. I mean, I've had students that have stretched, the linen, have rabbit skin glued the linen, and then it's distorted, and they try to go back, and they just can't. The linen is just, the ripples are there, and that is really, really painful. Especially if you invested a lot of time stretching. So let's see. Do we have any more questions? So yeah, there's a lot of information that I like sharing here on the channel. A lot of you that are coming by, and your amazing questions and amazing support. By the way, I want to tell everyone about our sale. We have a sale on our mentorship program and all our live classes at Atelier School Online. On the link below, you will find a link to my website, for my school's website, and there you could find the discount. So for a lot of you that are looking for something else, something a little bit more involved, and a curriculum, so I do these courses online. We meet once a week. We were meeting once a week last semester. This coming semester, we're switching our format to videos and critiques. So you'll be able to work with essentially video, pre-recorded videos, and then critiques, and in the 3 month, three blocks of 3 month periods. So it results in a convenient schedule for a lot of you that are that have other jobs or have busy schedules. I also have my Udemy courses. If you're just looking for an introductory course on drawing or basic painting techniques, check out my Udemy courses. They have high ratings, and I'm proud of the information that I've shared there. So make sure to check out the links below. And again, I'm going to come back with a lot more information in the future. I have in my sights Jacques-Louis David, an artist that I really admire, and his techniques are quite unique. So I'm going to be coming back with a whole presentation on his techniques, and I'm really excited about that. So thank you for joining once again. I hope to see you in about 2 weeks' time. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, make sure to subscribe for future notifications for my live presentations. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you for joining.